And welcome to the Mouthpiece Moment UFC 287 main card preview. It is the UFC's first trip back to the 305 Miami, Florida since 2003. That's right, 20 years, which seems pretty fucking wild for a place like Miami. We got a Jorge Masvidal born and raised in the 305, and he's looking like the mayor of Miami right now, for being honest. Huge fight against Gilbert Burns, huge implications for the welterweight title situation. Everything's up in the air. Pretty cool it's in Miami. There's a different vibe. I think the fighters are pretty pumped about it, so that's always good. There's also in the main event two combat sport rivalry between the newly crowned middleweight champion Alex Pereira, and he'll be giving a rematch to longtime champion and the man he TKO'd in November, Israel Adesanya. They fought twice in boxing and now once in MMA. Alex has won all three, two by KO/TKO. So that's a big deal. We'll get into that in a little bit. So I just want to jump right into it. Let's get into the main card opener at bantamweight. That is Raul Rojas Jr. versus Christian Rodriguez. Raul Rojas is undefeated at 7-0. He's 1-0 in the UFC. So he's a big story, and the reason he's on this main card is because he's made a huge splash. He was the youngest fighter ever signed in the UFC. He was signed at 17. He first fought at 18, but he's still the youngest fighter in the UFC based on the day that he fought and how old he was at the time. He's a hyper-confident kid. He really believes in his grappling. Apparently, he started out as a striker, but most of what I've seen is grappling. And I've only been able to see like two fights and some highlights on YouTube. So this one's kind of a weird one to break down, but I think it's going to be a good fight. The kid loves the spotlight, and he does well in the spotlight. He's not the best speaker, but he has a great attitude, and as long as he's winning, he's gonna do some big things, I think. He was talking about his debut, how he didn't have nerves, which is pretty crazy for an 18-year-old kid to get in there and just not have nerves in the UFC. This is a different situation because now he's on the main card of a huge pay-per-view. He doesn't seem to be bothered at all by that, as far as I can see when he's out there in public. So we'll see if that's a factor. He's usually a southpaw, but he switches stances pretty often. He's good everywhere. Again, he's only had two MMA fights, one in the UFC, so good for that being the case. 7-0, that's pretty good if you think about it. Constant movement. He fights very hyper, if that makes sense. And he goes for it. He throws himself into danger, throws caution to the wind, constantly looking for submissions, chain grappling all day. The dude fights antsy and a lot of his, not a lot, but his two opponents have had trouble with the fact that he's constantly moving. So there's a lot of defense coming from his opponents. So look for that to be the case in this fight. He fought his debut at UFC 282. That was December of 2022. His debut was featured prelim fight, so that was a big spot. That was like the junior version of what he's doing, opening the main card of this. So it's interesting that he got put right into these big spots, and he's been able to handle it so far. So, good on him. He took his opponent down 40 seconds into that fight, took his back pretty easily after a little bit of a struggle, and then finished with a rear naked choke. So it was a pretty simple breakdown of what he does. It's going to be a lot of speed, a lot of chain grappling. He's fighting Christian Rodriguez, 25-year-old from Milwaukee, came up with Pettis and the Rufus Sport camp. I don't think he's there anymore. I think I could have sworn I saw, I should know this, but I could have sworn I saw him with like maybe Saif Saud or something. 8-1 record, 1-1 in the UFC. Kind of a weird entrance into the UFC. I think he was called up on short notice fight, and he lost his first fight, which if you watch the fight, he actually looks pretty good in that fight, considering the short notice. It was a featherweight fight. He's a bantamweight fighter, but he fought at featherweight, short notice, did pretty well. Patient counter strikers. And yeah, so he considers himself somebody who was mentored by Anthony and Sergio Pettis. He looks up to them sort of in a big brother way. That debut I was talking about was in February of 2022 against Jonathan Pierce, who is currently 5-1. And his debut, again, it was at featherweight. Jonathan Pierce is a featherweight, like a legit grappler, like a beast of a grappler. Again, 5-1. And so it looked like a huge mismatch, and he did pretty well. It was a step-up fight, super tough debut for anyone. I mean, Jonathan Pierce's nickname is JSP because of his grappling style, and it started out as a really good fight because I thought he was going to get murdered in that fight. Round one, he had Pierce in a deep guillotine, almost got the tap. It was very close. He lost that round because Pierce had a large amount of control time. That's kind of the story of that fight, was Jonathan Pierce's control time. And again, it's a bigger guy, a higher weight class, short notice. So it's not crazy to see that the kid got out grappled by a bigger guy on short notice. Round two came around, and Christian ended up piecing up Pierce, just landing some shots and looking really good, and eventually was sort of out grappled towards the end of the round. So the first 2 rounds, he just basically was getting out grappled. Understandable. Did a great job of staying out of trouble that whole time. He didn't really look in trouble at any point. He just was being controlled. So, I mean, that's how that goes. Round 3 comes out, starts piecing up Pierce again, and actually had Pierce's back for a little bit. So to go against a guy who's heavier and who's all grappling, and to be able to take his back, I mean, that's significant. But eventually Pierce ended up getting control again, and he won a unanimous decision. I thought Christian Rodriguez was really impressive in that loss, and he got to fight at his own weight class in October 2022. His body looked a lot different. I mean, him at featherweight looked much different than he looked at bantamweight, and so that's something that I saw again in the weigh-ins just now. He got taken down twice by his opponent. I forgot the guy's name, something Weems, but was able to finish with an anaconda choke on the ground. And what was interesting was he looked less impressive in the win than he did in the loss. So it's kind of like a toss-up here. Again, he had some highlights I was able to see on YouTube, but he's a fairly young, fairly inexperienced fighter who just looked great on the highlights and everything before the UFC. This last fight was kind of weird. He seemed like something was a little off. Very hard to pick. I originally had Christian Rodriguez winning. I thought maybe he could pull off a decision or possibly a TKO, and then and I've been watching the I don't know what that was with my hand, but I've been watching the media leading up to this, the interviews and stuff, and he seems a little nervous, and it's understandable. It's not like he's still a young fighter, and most people in his scenario don't end up being on a main card like this. So you could tell he's really having a rough time with the media and everything. But then he missed weight. He missed weight by, I think, a little over a pound. So to me, that just tells me things aren't going well. I changed my mind on the Jeff Neal and Shavkat Rakhmonov fight because of a weight miss. I believe the same thing here. I think I'm going to go with Raul Rojas winning by submission in the second round. I think there might be some gassing issues for Christian, and so yeah, I'm gonna switch my pick, and I'm gonna go with Raul Rojas. The next fight is a welterweight fight. This one could either be a banger or it could end up being a decision. Kevin Holland versus Santiago Ponzinibbio. Kevin Holland, 6'3", 81-inch reach for 170 pounds. That's insane. He is on a 2-fight losing streak. So that's something to pay attention to. Kevin Holland, a.k.a. Big Mouth, because he talks a lot. He's even talking in the octagon again to his opponent. He seems to be a pretty friendly guy. It's not like, fuck you, I hate you kind of stuff. It's more of like playing around. Oh, that was a nice kick. Hey, you see that? Hey, let's not grapple, this and that. This has made him a fan favorite. So a lot of people like watching him. He's going to continue to be on pay-per-views. Very, very active fighter. Black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu under Travis Lutter. I don't know if the old school guys will remember Travis Lutter, who fought Anderson Silva and actually had him mounted at one point. But Travis Lutter missed weight in that fight. He wasn't allowed to win the title. He lost the fight, but it was just impressive at that time to see this guy that no one's ever heard of on the big scale. I mean, I remember watching his other fights, but not that many people knew who he was at the time that he fought Anderson Silva. And he actually mounted him, and his whole game was Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So I remember that. So back to his protege Kevin Holland. Granite chin. He only had the only TKO loss he's ever had, or KO loss he has ever had, was a corner stoppage, and that was from his he broke his hand in the fight, or he said he did. So he gets cracked a lot, to be honest, but he can really I've never seen him rocked badly. I've seen a couple times where he's backed up, but it's never really rocked per se. He's only 30 years old, but he has 17 fights in the UFC in less than 5 years. That is insane. I'm going to say that again. 30 years old, 17 fights in UFC, less than 5 years. He's one of, if not the busiest fighter in the UFC. 4 fights last year alone. 4 fights in 2022. That's impressive. He hits very hard, and he kind of tends to have a wild approach. I'm not saying he's not skilled and he's not technical, but he prefers, it seems to me, to kind of swing for the fences, get into a wild match, play up for the fans. He seems to be the type of guy, based on what he's saying, he's not too worried about a title shot and picking his fights and picking. Obviously, if he's one of the most active fighters, he's got that Cowboy Cerrone vibe. Like, I'll take anyone, anywhere. Let's go. I just want to fight, make money. He always seems to have the speed advantage over his opponents. And doesn't mind a nice little brawl. And it's crazy because he looks real skinny. Obviously 6'3". He looks skinny, but he hits hard as fuck. Very similar. I'm not talking about their styles, but a similar power that like Jalen Turner would have, that skinny frame but hits hard as fuck. I mean, that's something that helps him out. That's why he was able to be booked for so many fights, because he's excited and he was smashing people when he first got in the UFC. When he, smashed up Joaquin Buckley, that was pretty insane. That got a lot of eyes and a lot of views on him. He moved down to welterweight, I'm sorry, in March of last year, fighting Cowboy Oliveira, not Cowboy Cerrone. This is the Brazilian Cowboy. Came out guns and blazing. I'm sorry, in the first round, he didn't come out guns and blazing. First round, I felt like he lost that round. Cowboy did a good job at nullifying his length and cracking him on a few counter strikes. And second round, he came out guns blazing, ended up dropping Oliveira and then finishing with elbows. And it was pretty brutal. So I remember thinking, like, is this too much of a step up at this point? Is it too big of a fight for Kevin Holland? And it wasn't. He smashed up Cowboy, and that's a fun fight to watch. Watch that one. Then his next fight, he lost to Khamzat Chimaev by a Darce choke. That was kind of a weird fight. That was September 2022, when there was a weird swapping of opponent situation where Khamzat was supposed to fight Nate Diaz, and there was a tussle between Khamzat and Kevin Holland, and then Chimaev didn't make weight, so there was a whole thing. He ended up fighting. It was like a 1-day notice is when the whole thing changed or something like that. Khamzat came out faking the glove tap, took him down. They were rolling around trying to see what was going to happen. Ended up grabbing a Darce choke, holding on, and eventually he was forced to tap. So he also lost to Wonderboy Thompson in December of last year, and it was that TKO that I talked about earlier where he broke his hand. That is a really fun fight to watch. They had this sort of verbal agreement ahead of time. Let's not take it to the ground. There's no takedowns. If we go to the ground, let's get back up. Super entertaining. I know that Kevin hurt Wonderboy once in the first round, and it looked bad right away. It was like, oh shit, he's about to put Wonderboy to sleep. Wonderboy was able to kind of pull himself together, ended up getting out of that round. And it seems that's the round that Kevin broke his hand. That's what he said. He said, I think I broke it in the first round. So he was sort of fighting. You could see he stops throwing the right as much and is focusing on his jab and some short left hooks. Wonderboy noticed that there was a hand injury, I'm sure he was told by his corner, and he just starts throwing these haymaker head kicks and spinning wheel kicks to that side, knowing that Kevin had two choices. One, block with your broken hand, or two, take the shot in your head. And later on in like the third round, Kevin Holland starts sort of backing up into against the cage, basically like a wounded animal. If that's really all I could say about it. And eventually he started shooting for takedowns, which the whole point was, we're not going to do that. We're not going to go for takedowns. We're just let's just bang and see what happens. He ended up talking to his corner, and his corner told the ref in between the third and fourth rounds, that's it. So it was a TKO victory for Wonderboy. Wonderboy got cut up a little bit too. I mean, every time Kevin lands, it hurts and it stuns these guys. And No matter, I haven't watched him fight any fight that was boring. So for people that are looking for, if you're a newer fan and you're looking for some big time entertainment, make sure you watch that fight. His opponent is Santiago Ponzinibbio, the Argentine dagger. Excuse me. Oh, that's lovely. A little bit of water. A longtime welterweight veteran coming out of ATT in Florida, so this is kind of like a home fight for him. He had a 7-fight win streak going on in the UFC before it was stopped by he got KO'd by Jing Liang. Dang, that was back in January 2021. Forward-moving boxing style. He does throw some nice leg kicks. He seems to mix it up very well. He's got a good, I think he's a Spanish commentator for the UFC, or it might be for ESPN. He does like the Spanish commentary side of a lot of these fights. I will say this. I'm gonna give you guys a fair warning. Look out for a round 1 eye poke. Not exactly saying that he's like a dirty fighter, but there seems to be a shitload of eye pokes in this guy's history. Just be ready for it. If I call it, you're welcome. If you put a fucking bet on it, you're welcome. I don't know how they would bet that. That might be one of those weird, what are those bets called? Prop bets. I wonder if there was a prop bet for Santiago and eye pokes. Maybe not. I suffered a split decision loss to Jeff Neal in December of 2021. That's a slugfest. If you like just, toe-to-toe brawling style fights, watch that one. He lost another split decision to Michel Pereira in May of 2022. The reason I'm bringing up this fight specifically is Michel Pereira fights long, and obviously Kevin Holland has the reach and an insane reach for the welterweight division, and Santiago had a lot of trouble with Michel's speed and the way he fights long, and those are two advantages that Holland will have as well. So might be some sort of foreshadowing into what we might see tomorrow. Round 3 was a bloody slugfest in that fight. If you want to see that kind of bloody toe-to-toe fight to the death kind of fights, that's a fight you want to watch. I feel like the judges got this one right. Santiago felt like he got robbed on both of those split decision losses. I disagree. I think they got it right both times. And then his last fight, he ended up getting a TKO win over last-minute replacement Alex Morono. That was December of 2022. It was a 3rd-round finish. I feel like Alex clearly won round 1 and had Santiago hurt towards the end of that round. 2 minutes. Almost getting ahead of myself over here. I have notes down here that I'm just paying attention to. I'm glad that I just fucking ripped the curtain open and showed you guys all what's going on. Just kidding, I didn't show you. But back to the fight. Alex clearly won that first round. And I think he was winning the second round as well. It was interesting to see that Alex was so well prepared and ready for that fight because, I mean, you wouldn't think he's at that level yet. He's been doing very well throughout the years, but seems to get bumped back down every time he's moving up the ladder. He actually dropped Santiago in round 2, which was interesting. So after that round, I had him up 2 rounds over Santiago. 2 minutes into round 3, Alex hurt Santiago again and had him on roller skates. It looked like, this is it. He's finally going to get it. And it would have been a huge upset. But Santiago was able to land a nice... I thought it was a 1-2 at first, but it looks like he was reaching down for a knee and landed a straight right. And it's an interesting sight. Alex's like chin kind of gets stuck in this weird... Like, you could tell he was gone, and then he got dropped again with the right and finished on the ground. Props to Alex for stepping up. But, yeah, Santiago finished that one. He went nuts. That was his last fight, so now he's on this high, this rush. Like, it's going to be like this again. He seems to always act like he's not very bothered by anybody else, any of the other fighters. I got Kevin Holland winning this fight by second-round TKO. I think the Michel Pereira fight might be a little bit of a blueprint, even though Michel Pereira was very sharp and was fighting technical most of that fight. I just think that Santiago's coming closer to the end of his career, and he's had some wars. He's had some real bangers that put a lot of damage to the face and the head, and I think that Kevin Holland's power and speed and his length are going to give him a lot of trouble, and so I have Kevin Holland winning that second round TKO. The next fight, this is a fight I'm hyped to watch. Two guys I really like, and that's a bantamweight fight. number 6 ranked Rob Font against number 12 ranked Adrian Yanez. Rob Font came into the UFC at 10-1. That was back in 2014. Very active guy. I'm sorry, not a very active guy. For being around that long, he's 9-5 in the UFC. So only 14 fights in about 9 years. Not very active, but he puts on a show every time he fights. Real smooth, slick boxer from Boston. He fights out of I can't think of the name of the team he's on. The New England Cartel, I believe. Always starts out every round hot. He comes out. His jab is amazing. If you want to look at a sharp, legit jab in MMA, look no further than Rob Font. That is a jab of beauty. Another thing that's interesting, he's never been KO'd before. Very durable, solid chin. He recovers pretty well. Now, I won't say he hasn't been rocked. He's definitely been rocked several times in the UFC, but he seems to be able to gather his strength and his bearing, so to speak, and he ends up coming back. His first 5 wins in the UFC were finishes. So I remember he came in hot. He was dropping people. He started looking like this guy's going to get some big fight soon. But since those 5 finishes, he only had one other finish in those last 7 fights since 2018. So he's been fighting, and obviously, like most fighters, when the competition gets higher, the finish is lower. That makes sense because these guys are better. So they're less likely to fall for the same tricks, they're more solid, they're more durable. So he's been in a few wars. He was on a 4-fight win streak until he lost a unanimous decision to legend Jose Aldo. That was back in 2021. And at this point, he's really only lost to elite bantamweights. So some of those stats and some of those that I just gave off might make it seem like something's wrong, but he's really only lost to the elite of the elite. Coming off 3 main events in a row. So if you haven't heard of Rob Font, maybe you're just not watching those smaller fights. The dude's legit. Those 3 fights were Cody Garbrandt, Jose Aldo, and Chito Vera. All great fights, all bangers. And in all 3 of those fights, he landed over 100 significant strikes. So he stays busy. In all 3 of those fights, over 100 significant strikes. He's a very busy fighter. He usually lands more. He's a volume striker. He has a lot of power, but as of recently, he's known as a volume striker. So he's going to be throwing a lot and early as well. He was ranked number 4 when he fought Aldo, so you can see how high he climbed the ladder until losing, twice in a row. The Aldo fight, he had some success by just putting a lot of volume, like I said. And Aldo, he's an older guy. He's got years on him. He's got a lot of miles on him. So Aldo was kind of just sticking to this 1-2 combo repetition, and it worked for him. He was doing well. Every time he landed on Rob Font was getting hurt. Rob Font's face looked beat in both that fight and in the Chito Vera fight. I don't think Aldo is as slick of a boxer as Yanez is. Now, before you flip out, I just said he's not as slick of a boxer. That's all. Calm down. And in that fight, Font was able to smash up Aldo's eye. I don't think I've ever seen Aldo's eye look that bad. It was round 3 out of a 5-round fight. His right eye just looked all crazy. He looked like a fucking Ninja Turtle. I gotta stop saying and It's a Conan O'Brien thing. I got stuck on that in the late 90s, early 2000s. I think it's funny, and I do it way too often. Motherfucker. Aldo dropped him at the end of round 4. There it is again. Dropped him at the end of round 4. Rob Font got back up, but he was stunned. We saw the same thing in multiple rounds. In round 5, he got dropped again, and it looked really bad towards the end of the round. So what we see this pattern of Rob Font starting out hot in the first half of the round and then starting to fade, and then he gets dropped. That's happened in multiple rounds. Very similar fight, similar story in the Chito Vera fight. Chito Vera wasn't providing a whole lot of volume in the beginning of the fight, and it started to look like he was going to lose that fight pretty quickly if things stayed the same way they were. But then eventually Chito dropped Rob Font 3 times, multiple times, and around the last minute of that fight, multiple times. And I'm watching this fight, and these fights, and I've noticed that Rob Font has taken a lot of damage in the last 3 fights. A lot of damage. He did well against Cody Garbrandt, but specifically in the Aldo and the Chito fight, he took a lot of damage, and that can hurt people's career. Adrian Yanez, though, rep in Texas, Dana White Contender Series alum, fairly young cat, 5-0 in the UFC. 4 of those wins by KO or TKO. Has been stylistically compared to Jorge Masvidal. Great boxer, not a flashy striker. He's not throwing a bunch of spinning things or nothing like that. It's very tight boxing, very patient, high-level counter striker, I'd say. Very durable as well. There's been a few fights where he's been cracked, specifically the Randy Costa fight. He takes that first round, at least the first few minutes, to read what his opponent is doing, and there's a lot of information he's taking in there, and he's learning how to counter from that point. Heavy hands. So when I'm talking about his boxing style, when he lands, people get hurt, and he's very confident in that. He doesn't mind taking a few cracks in the first few minutes to figure out what he's going to do next. We haven't seen much of his ground game, but he is a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. That's sort of, I wouldn't say unknown, but most people wouldn't think of him. If you see his fights, you wouldn't think he's a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. That probably is why he's so comfortable on his feet. He's like, we go to the ground, I'm fine, I got a black belt. Doesn't get hit clean very often. That's something I noticed. There's a lot of him getting cracked in a lot of these fights, but if you really watch the fights, it's a lot of him getting punched in the shoulder and in the neck. There's a lot of smacking sounds, and I watched him, and I actually rewatched one of the fights, and I noticed a lot of those punches were hitting him in the neck and in the shoulders because of his defensive movement, constantly rolling with punches. Maybe not the traditional shoulder roll, but he knows how to get out of the way or how to roll with the punches so they're not hitting as clean, and he's moving with the punches. He fought Randy Costa in July of 2021 in a highly anticipated fight because they both were up-and-coming guys who had made a lot of noise really quickly. I was pumped to see that fight. I was pumped to rewatch that fight because I was high on Randy Costa before this fight, and this kind of changed. I remember seeing this fight and being like, holy shit, Adrian Yanez is a badass. Costa was eating him up in the first round with his jab. It looked bad. It started looking real bad. He was bleeding just a little bit, but he was getting popped over and over. And I'm thinking, how is Yanez such an amazing boxer striker and he's getting pieced up like this? So it started to look bad. Second round, he adjusted, started landing his own jab. And it was funny, like there was a moment where it was during the COVID quiet UFC Apex fights where there wasn't really a crowd. So DC Daniel Cormier was saying out loud, like, oh yeah, and he's just doing his commentary. He wasn't talking to Adrian, but he was saying, he should be landing his own jab. When you get jabbed like that, you got to start landing your own jab. And Adrian Yanez points at him and refers to him like, hey, I gotcha. Thank you for that, DC. And then just starts landing his own jab and eventually starts landing some major body work, a lot of nasty hooks to the body and some nice uppercuts. Hurt Costa and finish him with strikes. And it kind of came out of nowhere. I mean, the way Randy Costa dropped, it didn't seem, it was kind of like, wait, whoa, what happened? And I think just on watching that fight, I do think Yanez is going to have some trouble with Rob Font's jab because everybody has trouble with it. And that fight, I'm sure things have changed. I'm sure that he's cleaned things up. But that fight showed a little bit of a hole in the game plan. I'm sorry, not game plan, but just a little bit of a chink in the armor, we'll say. I'm assuming by now that's changed, so hopefully that's the case. I'm a big fan of Adrian Yanez. Now, he seems like a real nice guy, but the fight you really want to watch if you want to get goosebumps is Adrian Yanez versus Tony Kelly. That was in June of last year, June of 2022 in Austin, Texas. Now, again, he's a Texas boy, so this was a sort of a hometown fight. He got a big pop from the crowd. And so whatever you're doing right now, just pause this shit, go watch Tony Kelly versus Adrian Yanez. So they had some sort of beef before the fight. I don't remember exactly what it was. I know that Tony Kelly missed weight, and I think there was some kind of commotion at the weigh-ins, I believe. And so when they announced Tony Kelly in the octagon, he flips off the crowd because the crowd is booing him, and it was one of those like, uh-oh, this could be real bad for you. And so Yanez was just hyped. He even said he's like a super nice guy, but he was a little pissed off about this fight. And so he starts to they start doing their thing. Tony Kelly's moving around the edge a lot. Once the fight started, it seemed like a different story. Tony Kelly was on his roller skates the whole time, moving, staying on the outside, staying around the edge. And Yanez just waited patiently and just started smashing Tony Kelly up with nasty hooks and started, at one point, Tony Kelly was facing the wrong way, getting cracked and landed, these big nasty hooks. He falls. The whole crowd goes nuts. And then Adrian Yanez, the nice guy, flips him off in the crowd. It was one of those picture perfect moments that you see like in in movies and stuff. And it was a pretty cool situation considering you just know Tony Kelly was being some sort of douchebag. That camp has had some weird stuff going on. I don't know. It looked bad on his end to be going that route. I think Rob Font's going to have a great first round, but I do think he's going to get stunned towards the end of the first round. I think in the second round, Giannis is going to find his range perfectly, and I think we're going to see a second round TKO. I think this is the fight that Giannis becomes a star. I think it's going to be amazing. I think the crowd's going to go nuts, and that'll lead right into the co-main event. The highly anticipated Gilbert Burns, who's ranked number 5, against Jorge Masvidal, who's ranked number 11. Excuse me. Oh, boy. So we're going to get into Gilbert Burns first. Great everywhere. I think I broke him down on one of the last few ones when he fought... Jesus Christ, I forgot his name. Anyway, 4-time Jiu-Jitsu world champion. He has wins over Wonderboy Thompson, Tyron Woodley, and Damian Maia. He can box with the elite of the elite in the welterweight division, and he has some of the best Jiu-Jitsu in all of MMA, and that's undisputable. Former title challenger, he lost to Kamaru Usman and got TKO'd. He went on a 6-fight win streak before losing that fight. That fight was in February 2021. He won his next fight against Wonderboy Thompson. Super close fight against Khamzat Chimaev that he lost in a decision loss. But at that point, Khamzat was looking unstoppable. He was tearing through everybody. And I remember Khamzat saying that he was humbled during that fight, that he actually, needed to go reevaluate a few things and train some things. Gilbert Burns put it on him. Gilbert Burns dropped him. No one had dropped him at that point. And he did well to escape all submissions. He wasn't out-wrestled the entire fight. There were some moments where he got out-wrestled, but Gilbert Burns really put Chimaev in a place where he had to calm down a little bit. I mean, everything's changed. Chimaev is still going back to being a maniac, but that was a great fight to watch. Check that one out if you have some time. Neil Magny is the name of the guy. Jesus, that I was talking about earlier. I'm sorry, everyone. I messed that one up. He made quick work of Neil Magny in January of this year, finished with a first-round arm triangle. That was the fight in Brazil. So he's repping a camp called the Kill Cliff Gym. They're formerly known as the Black Zillions and like 4 other names. They used to be Sanford MMA. And they are a longtime rival. It's not a big deal anymore as far as I know, but they were a longtime rival of ATT, American Top Team, which is where Jorge Masvidal trains and who he represents. I don't remember the season, but one of the UFC Ultimate Fighter seasons was literally the Black Zillions versus the ATT camp. And it wasn't like people from all over the place. It was some hopefuls from the Black Zillion camp and some hopefuls from the ATT camp, and they fought each other. It was the season that Kamaru Usman won. He was formerly of the Black Zillions, and so that's an interesting little note to have here for this fight that's in Florida. Both camps are in South Florida, and then they had this rivalry before, and so that's another point to make this interesting. If you know the full scope of the history between these two guys, they don't have beef, so that's cool. Like I'm not one of those people that needs beef for a fight to be interesting, but the two guys are thinking they're on the cusp of a title shot. Jorge Masvidal might not be considered in the same situation if he didn't have an actual beef with the champ Leon Edwards. Both guys lost to Kamaru Usman, so that's an interesting factor here, considering Kamaru Usman's now out of the title picture. Jorge Masvidal is of Cuban descent, born and raised in Miami. He joined the UFC in 2013, so he's been here 10 years now, 20-year veteran. I think he has like 53 or 55 fights, or something crazy like that. He used to fight at lightweight until 2016, and that's when he moved up to welterweight. He has wins over Michael Chiesa, Jake Allenberger, Cowboy Cerrone, Darren Till, Ben Askren, and Nate Diaz most recently. So he lost 2 in a row in 2017. He took all of 2018 off, and then just had a flawless 2019. He had the KO win over Darren Till in England, which is where the whole 3-piece combo where he was piecing up Leon Edwards after an interview. And then he had the what was widely considered the KO of the year, which is that flying knee KO of Ben Askren in like 7 seconds or whatever. That blew him the fuck up. Then he became this mega huge superstar. And then finally ended that year with a doctor stoppage TKO against Nate Diaz, where he won the BMF title, the bad motherfucker title. So he's the current BMF title holder. Hasn't ever defended it. Dana White said they don't have any plans of actually doing anything with it. That was just so he won the inaugural BMF title, still has it, hasn't had to defend it. And he hasn't won a fight since then, and that was in 2019. Crafty, patient boxing base. He does have great leg kicks and nasty body kicks. Mostly a boxer, though. He does have KO power. I just mentioned 2 KOs that really propelled him to the next level. Really crafty ground game. Usually it's a defensive ground game to get him back to the feet where he shines with those hands. 0-3 in his last 3 fights, something to think about. He lost twice. 2 of those fights were losses to Kamaru Usman. One of them was a short notice fight. That's the unanimous decision victory he lost. And then he got a rematch, and that's when he was knocked out for the first time ever. He had never been knocked out up until the time when Kamaru Usman put him to sleep. That was in April of 2021. And then his last fight was a loss to Colby Covington in March of 2022. He lost that decision. And then some of us know what happened after that. He decided to go find him on the streets. Allegedly, he says it didn't happen. Some people said it happened, whatever. And one thing I found really interesting that he said was, and this is a quote, "If I lose this one, I'm pretty much calling it quits." And that was early in the week, maybe Monday or something like that. Sounds like a retirement fight to me. It's in Miami. It would make sense. We're putting an inactive 38-year-old against a very active 36-year-old. A lot of people are picking Jorge Masvidal because it's a hometown fight. I feel like the styles match up very well. There's a lot of canceling out between their styles, but I do also feel like Jorge Masvidal is feeling like this is the end. This is the last fight. He's made a few comments, so I'm going to go with Burns winning by decision. Jorge Masvidal is very, very durable, so it's always hard to get him out of there. When Kamaru Usman knocked him out, it was like crazy. I remember being like, what in the fuck did we just watch? So all these fights have been really hard to pick, honestly. I could go either way with the Burns-Masvidal fight. I'm going to go with Burns by decision, and hopefully he gets a title shot, hopefully he gets the next title shot. I think he deserves it again. The great thing about Gilbert Burns is he is the real epitome of anytime, anywhere kind of fighter. A real bad motherfucker. Even though he's like a nice guy, he's down to fight anyone, anytime, anywhere, and he has been a super active fighter. I think he gets it done. He's been talking about his training, or not his training, but just his preparation and all the changes he made. He's not having he hasn't had any added sugar, I think he said, since December. He's doing ice baths daily. He just seems locked in. I think he understands how big this fight is, and I don't think he's taking it lightly. I think he's done everything. I think he's going to win. Now, let's get some water before this one. On to the main event, the middleweight title bout between the champ Alex Pereira and number 1 ranked and former champion Israel Adesanya. There's not a whole lot to say about this one. This is very much a hard fight to pick. Izzy currently is the favorite here. Alex Pereira won the middleweight title by TKO last year in November over, Izzy Adesanya, who was a longtime champion and a longtime rival of Jesus Christ. Stop making noises. Longtime rival of Alex Pereira. They fought 2 times in kickboxing before both of them were MMA fighters, and Alex won both of them. The first one he won by decision, second one he won by knockout, and he KO'd Izzy. Izzy went on to become a legend in MMA, and there's an interview where he said something about how Alex is going to be that old dude at the bar who points to Izzy and says, "Oh, I knocked that guy out one time," and that's all he's gonna ever be able to do. He's just gonna be that guy. Apparently, that fired Alex up, and Alex decided that he's gonna get into MMA, train hard, got an MMA, got in the UFC, and then TKO'd Izzy straight up. I mean, I definitely don't think it was an early stoppage. I think it was the right thing to do. Izzy's hands were down. He didn't seem to be looking in the correct place, and that's what happens. He's a huge Brazilian kickboxing phenom. The size of his head is like double the size of Izzy's. He's just a big dude who probably should be and probably will be fighting at light heavyweight after this fight. Very durable and extremely great recovery ability, which we saw in the first round. The first round of their last fight, Izzy cracked him hard with 2 hooks, and it looked like if there were 3 to 5 more seconds in that round, Alex would have lost it. Lucky for us, he was able to last and did pretty well the next 2 rounds. Most people saw it 3-1 leading into the 5th round. That's a fair assessment. And was interesting, this little fact I figured out when I looked at just the timeline of the two. So he became the champ in his 4th UFC fight, which is crazy. 1 year and 6 days into his career, his UFC career, I should say. Izzy did it in 7 fights, and it was 1 year and 8 months. Now, obviously, it's 2 totally different things. The reason Alex was able to get close to a title shot was because of his situation with Izzy. I get that. I'm not like stupid. I just looked at the numbers, and that was something interesting. And one thing I always find pretty cool is he draws, I'm going to talk about Alex, draws on his indigenous roots to bring forward this warrior spirit. I like that whole thing he does where he walks in, and right when he walks in, he shoots the arrow. I got to get my hands in there. He shoots the arrow. I think that's cool. I like the whole headdress thing. I dig it. It's pretty awesome. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. Izzy, most people know a lot about Izzy. 23-0 in MMA as a middleweight before meeting Alex. 12-0 as a middleweight in the UFC until he got TKO'd. He had essentially cleaned out the middleweight division. He even went up to the light heavyweight division and fought for the title against then champion Jan Blachowicz. He lost that fight. Just wasn't strong enough, wasn't heavy enough. His grappling wasn't up to speed. He lost that fight. But good for him to go up there and challenge himself. So that fight was his only loss in the UFC before this loss to Alex, but it was at a higher weight division. So he was still just the king of the middleweight division. There's an interesting stat that's been mentioned a few times. The record for former UFC champions in their immediate title rematch. So for anyone who lost their title and got an immediate rematch, the record is the record in the UFC is 4-13. So there's only been 4 wins. The other 13 were losses. That's what we just saw with Kamaru Usman. Kamaru Usman lost his title with a head kick KO, got an immediate rematch, and he lost by decision. Same situation, similar scenario. And Izzy's been really uncomfortable in these media interviews. I mean, he's saying he has a chip on his shoulder. That seems very true, but he seems ultra annoyed with everything that's going on. I think the whole idea of him being in uncharted territory, not being the big dog, being the guy that lost, being the challenger to what used to be his title, a guy that's 0-3 against this guy, swears that it's totally different this time. We'll see what happens. I'm excited about it. There seems to be a lot of confidence coming from him. A lot of people are choosing Izzy to win this. Obviously, the betting line says that. But I'm going to stick with Pereira by KO. I think Izzy's going to be... I don't think he's going to be as sharp. I think he's going to be a little more likely to... I think he wants to KO Pereira, and I think he's going to lose sight of what got him to do well in the last fight. And I think he's going to... He even said himself that he knows that Alex has this incredible durability and this incredible ability to recover. So I think he's going to put his foot on the gas a lot more early in the first round. Actually, I'll say early in the second round. I think first round they're going to feel each other out. But Alex has been training in Thailand for this fight, and I think he's going to find a way to hurt Izzy again. I think Izzy is going to have to really think about what he's going to do next. I got Alex Pereira by KO. Those are my picks. Appreciate you guys for listening. And one of these right here. Yo, sponsor me, yo. That's the realness. You guys want to see some real tequila that's not super expensive. El Tequileño. Thank you guys for watching. Salud.